This video finds us 1,000 miles from the nearest land, just the two of us on board in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean.
Over the last 7 years, we have circled the globe on our 37-foot sailboat, Florence. Together we have sailed nearly 50,000 miles across the world's oceans, and we are now halfway through our 5th major ocean crossing.
After a wet and bumpy few days of sailing, we have a brief reprieve in the weather, a day of gentle winds and calmer seas before the approaching gale.
So we're pretty much halfway across the Atlantic Ocean now, halfway between Bermuda and the Azores. And that bad weather has finally gone through, and we've got a couple of hours before the next lot of bad weather comes in. So we actually thought this would be a great opportunity to show you around Florence and show you how we live aboard when we're at sea, because it is different to when we're at anchor. So this will, I guess, be a mid-Atlantic boat tour.
Florence is an Oyster Heritage 37, built in England in 1985.
She's 37 feet long, 12 feet wide. She draws 5.5 feet, and we love her.
So this is where we spend over 50% of our time on board when we're sailing across an ocean, sat in the cockpit, keeping watch, because we have to have one of us on watch, sailing the boat and keeping a lookout at all times. And this is actually where we normally sit, wedged in this corner here, because it gives us the best protection for any waves and spray coming over the spray hood, and you can really wedge yourself in. We've actually picked a day when the sea is calm, so that we've got somebody who can hold the camera and we've got spare hands to talk and show you things. Normally we're properly wedged in here, and it's actually difficult to move around because of the motion of the ocean. So here we can reach back, we can steer the boat. We've got this line which controls the Aries. We can click it either way and the boat will head up or bear away. And then all of the controls to the sails lead back into the cockpit. We can do everything with the mainsail from here. We don't have to go outside the cockpit. We've got the main sheet winch, the halyard, and all the reefing lines here. And then the genoa sheets lead back to here and the furling line across the other side. And we think it's really important to be able to do all of these things from within the cockpit and avoid going out on deck as much as possible, because when you're out on deck, it's a much higher risk, especially when the boat's getting thrown around, of you getting thrown over the side, which is obviously a major catastrophe when you're out in the ocean like this, because there's no one to rescue you. There are, however, two sails that we do have to go out on deck for, and that's the staysail, because it's a hank-on sail, so we have to go out there to hoist it, and the spinnaker, which we have to go out if we need to put that up. And also, if we want to put the pole out so we can sail wing on wing with the genoa out one side and the mainsail the other side, we have to go up to the mast to do that. But everything else we can do from within the cockpit. So actually, it almost feels like a little holiday when we go up on the bow, because we spend so much time here that we can go days without going up on the foredeck. And then when you do go up there, it's like a completely different world. From a navigation and instruments point of view, we've got everything here in front of us. Now, a lot of boats that we see have their chart plotters and instruments located on the helm station, but because we're crossing oceans, we hardly ever steer. We're always sat right up here, so we have everything so we can easily see it in front of us there, and we can also see it from the helm if we are steering. So here we've got the autopilot controls. We don't use that very much because it uses a lot of power, so we use the Aries instead, because that doesn't use any power at all. And we've got the chart plotter, which is currently switched off because there's not a lot for it to show. It would just show sea. And again, that uses power, and we need to be a little bit careful with how much power we have available on board, especially when we've got lots of cloudy days like we have at the moment. And then you've got your normal instruments showing depth, which obviously doesn't show much because it's a couple of thousand meters deep, and then the wind instruments. And importantly, in the middle, we've got our GPS heading, and all we're really doing as we're sailing across, we've got a GPS waypoint off of Flores in the Azores, and we're aiming for that, and this tells us what the bearing is to that waypoint, and then above it there's another number which has our heading, and all we're trying to do is make sure that we're heading towards that waypoint, and then eventually we will get there.
We've got two large storage lockers on Florence, the cockpit locker, which is here, and also the lazarette, which is right at the back of the boat. But the lazarette we can't access at sea unless we disconnect the Aries, and it's also more susceptible to a wave coming and filling it up. So we tend to try, before we set off, to put everything that we need at sea into the cockpit locker and make sure that all of the lines and things that we need are placed on top. So this is our cockpit locker. Got to make sure that you tie it up, otherwise when we roll it'll fall on your head and that really hurts. So we have things like our spinnaker lines in here.
So at the back here we've got our gas locker, which is where all of our cooking gas is stored, and we've got 2 canisters so we can just swap over easily at sea. We make sure these are really well wedged, otherwise they can roll back and forth, which is not a good idea with gas, but also is a really annoying knocking sound if they do that. And then we've also got back here, if we move on to more emergency gear, is under here is our emergency tiller, and that is stored in the cockpit locker, nice and handy. And then if we have a problem with the steering brakes, this slots on, goes directly onto the rudder. So that's right onto the rudder shaft, and we can steer from here. We never had to do that, thankfully. And then staying on the emergency equipment theme, we also have our life raft, which you might have noticed isn't visible. And that's because it's actually in the floor of the cockpit. So this is the locker where our life raft is in here. So if we need to use that, we can just pick that out. It's already tied on, just throw it over the side, yank the line, and it should inflate, hopefully, since it is recently serviced.
Needs a clean in there.
Definitely needs a clean in there. The trouble is, because it's down in the bottom of the cockpit, any grunge or crumbs or anything just gravitates down and into the life raft locker. And one of the worst jobs on board Florence, apart from cleaning and fixing the toilet, is cleaning out the life raft locker, because it does get pretty disgusting.
We actually do all of our fishing from here inside the cockpit as well, and we keep the rod inside the holder, and then Matt will bring the fish alongside and dump it into the bottom of the cockpit. Nice!
Oh yeah!
Yes! That is when we do actually catch one. It's been a little while since we caught a fish, and we have not caught one on this crossing. We had such a good lure that it got eaten, and so we changed it over, and we're talking about changing it back, because this one is not working.
As an offering to the gods of Murphy's Law or Sod's Law, we have an extra can of diesel strapped to the back here, because if we didn't have this, then we would run out of wind. But because we do have it, and because we paid really expensive Bermuda prices to fill it up, that being there means that we'll have wind all the way to the Azores.
It's working so far.
Good old pagan voodoo magic whatever. We have never actually run out of diesel or come close to running out of diesel on a crossing, but that is probably because when there's no wind, we prefer to just wait for wind and drift until the wind comes back. But this is because here crossing the North Atlantic Ocean, there are the depressions that go across, and they can bring some really nasty winds, and we did not want to be sat in no wind waiting for some horrible winds to come when an extra can of diesel would have allowed us to motor out of the way of that horrible wind. So that's why this is sat here as an extra safety measure. Florence's engine uses 2 litres per hour when we're motoring at 5 or 5.5 knots in calm conditions. So 20 litres here, 10 hours, 55 miles to get out of the way of a bad weather system coming. But in total, with the main fuel tank, we've also, I think we've got enough range to motor about 450 miles, but then we'd have no fuel left. Today, right now, it's not raining and there are no big waves breaking and splashing over into the cockpit to soak us, so we can sit here and we are convertible. We've got the roof down, we've got this nice airy view, and that's how we sailed Florence most of the way around the world, because we didn't have anything better. But in South Africa we had this cockpit tent made, and that has completely transformed life when it's raining and we've got those waves breaking over the cockpit. We made a really low profile design so that the cockpit tent doesn't affect the airflow to the Aries, and that's great, that works brilliantly, but the only thing about it is it does feel a little bit claustrophobic inside it sometimes, which at the start of the trip, when we haven't got used to the motion on board, doesn't help with the seasickness aspect of things.
So that's the cockpit tent on, and that's preparing us for the rain and the big waves that are coming later this afternoon. So if we move down below, and we'll start right at the bow. You'll notice Florence has got loads of places to hang on. It's not so bad today, but when it's really windy and wavy, we need all of these. So up here in the bow is our forepeak, and this is where we normally sleep when we're at anchor. But when we're at the sea, the motion up here gets so bad, and also the sound of the waves rushing past the bow are really loud. So we don't sleep here at sea, and instead we use this area to store things that we want easy access to. So at the moment we've got our storm jib here, and actually under my feet we have the rope and chain for our drogue, and these things are normally stored underneath the bed, but we actually expected really bad weather on this North Atlantic crossing, so we wanted them out and really easy to access.
Next back from the forepeak is the head, which is the nautical name for the toilet. Well, here we have our very important handles, and because we're up near the bow, if we are leaping over waves upwind like we were on the way to Bermuda, it's actually quite difficult to stay on the toilet whilst you're doing a business. So this handle here is really important, and sometimes it's good to have the door open so that you can grab round here as well and fully brace both feet. On Florence, gentlemen do as the ladies do and sit down to pee. I can also balance myself by bracing my head against the ceiling in here. It's not as high as the main saloon. So we've got a sink and all the normal toothbrushes and stuff in here, but we don't actually have a shower down here. This does lift up and there is a bracket on the wall, but that would get a lot of water everywhere down below, and we try and keep water out of Florence and keep her as dry as possible down below. So showering we'll go through later.
In the centre of Florence we have our saloon, and this is the main living space on Florence, and especially when we're at sea, because this is where the person who is off watch spends all of their time. Either here, sleeping in this, what looks like a cot here, or just chilling out and reading. So this is our sea bunk. We've actually got one of these at each side of the boat, and this is a lee cloth that helps hold us in, because occasionally we have forgotten to put this up and fallen out of bed.
Are we carrying on with this boat tour, or are you going to
Oh
sleep?
no, it's my off watch.
Leave me alone!
So over on the leeward side of the boat, this is actually where the side that we would normally sit or sleep on when we're on passage, because that's the lower side of the boat, and so you end up being pressed against the side rather than thrown across to the other side. But at the moment we've got the bed set up there, so we use this area as storage for things that we want easy access to. At the moment we've got our spinnaker in here, and the table is stopping things sliding back and forwards across the boat. Everything on board when we're at sea has to be really well wedged, otherwise it just gets thrown across the boat. So all of these books are solid, and there's even a clear holder here that I use to keep those in place.
They still sometimes go flying across the boat.
They still sometimes go flying across the boat, and they normally land on your head. Even the contents inside the cupboard get thrown around. So we find with this cupboard here, the contents, which are tins, sometimes hit the latch and the whole thing bursts open, and we get all of the contents of the cupboard right across the other side of the boat and the door swinging around. So we actually, it's not a very pretty method, but we tie this cupboard up when we're at sea.
So back here at the chart table, this is where when we're at anchor I would normally sit and edit here, but maybe when we're crossing an ocean you'd expect to see a chart here, a paper chart. But we don't actually use paper charts when we're sailing across the ocean. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback about that. We do have paper charts on board as a just-in-case backup, but actually we just use electronic charts. I mean, these days, who uses a road map to navigate? Everybody uses Google Maps. So we do the similar thing. We use electronic charts on board. And on the laptop here, we've got a complete backup of all of the charts, which we also have on the chart plotter. So if the chart plotter got lost and went over the side, we can still operate with the charts here. All of our AIS information, everything also feeds into this laptop, so it acts as a backup chart plotter. So we've got two ways of doing everything. In fact, the charts are also on other laptops we have on board as well. And this is where we also download our weather information using our sat phone, which just sits in this handy cubby here, and when we want to use it, flip the aerial up and put it on deck. Once we've downloaded the weather on the sat phone, we can view it on the laptop here. And what we've also got here is our GPS, so that's a backup for the chart plotter. So when we've got the chart plotter off, this is what we're actually using to give us the bearing to the waypoint and our heading. We've got our normal DSC VHF radio here, and our battery monitor and all our switches for controlling everything on board. That's the sat phone turning on. other than that, and writing the log, we don't spend a lot of time sat here at the chart table. Behind the chart table is the quarter berth, which, as usual, is full of, we use it as a garage really, so it's got folding bikes and a whole bunch of stuff that we're not going to use when we're sailing offshore, so we don't go back here when we're sailing offshore, apart from on the very front of it, we have, easy to get hold of, our grab bag, which has all of our emergency stuff in case we need to ditch into the life raft, and with it also an extra bag which has got some extra rations and things in.
On the opposite side of the boat to the chart table, we have the galley, and this is one of the most dangerous places on the boat, just because you're dealing with hot things and you're being thrown around and those hot things are being thrown around as well. So it's certainly the place that I have received the most injuries on our 7-year trip. The wind's starting to get up. So we've been at sea for a week, as I say, and so everything needs a really good clean. But what you'll be able to see is our stove is on gimbals, so it just helps counteract the motion of the boat and tries to keep the pots level. And we also have these fiddles, which help hold things in place. Only once has it been so rough that it's got to the extent of the gimbal and throwing the kettle over to the other side of the boat, and that was on the way to New Zealand. But most of the time, things tend to stay put on there. So it's a really good place for wedging things, because if you just leave things on the counter, they'll go flying. And it's also a good place as a sink. So you'll see that the sink is complete with some of today's washing up, because we actually only wash up once a day when we're at sea. We're trying to conserve water because we don't have a water maker. We've actually even tied up our cutlery drawer because yesterday it was quite rough and it just kept flying open and all of the knives and forks going over the boat. So again, another very pretty piece of rope tying the drawer shut, which you have to untie every single time you want to use it. One of the really good things about Florence's galley is that this behind me gives me something to brace against, so I don't get thrown around too much when I'm using the galley, because it's mostly me that uses the galley.
Break from boat tour. The wind's got up. We need to put a reef in.
Right, back to the galley. And normally when we're offshore, we would have some fruit hammocks strung up here, stuffed full of fresh fruits and vegetables. But unfortunately, fresh fruits and vegetables have been so expensive recently, particularly in Bermuda, where we've just come from, that we don't have that. So instead, we are living mostly off tinned and dried food that we bought way back in Martinique months ago. Because it's so difficult to move around the boat and also difficult to open the cupboards when the boat's heeling over without everything coming crashing out on top of you, before we set off, I tend to move the food that I think that we're going to particularly need when it's rough to the cupboards that are easy to access. So yeah, we've been living off fancy things like tinned chili con carne and beef stew.
Well, the wind and rain are back, so I guess that's the boat tour over. And this is forecast to get worse later on, so we just had some lunch and now we're going to take turns to sleep this afternoon so that we're alert tonight when we're doing our night watches, because it's going to be really difficult to keep a lookout in the rain and mist in the night, and it's forecast to get worse than this later. So just sending an update to the patron tracker, and then yeah, I think we'll settle down, hunker down and ride this next bit of bad weather out.
Riding that bad weather out turned out to be a bit more of a serious matter. Join us next time for 5 days of sailing in Gale Force 8, with squalls reaching 46 knots, nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest land. Sailing a small boat across the North Atlantic Ocean is certainly challenging.
If you enjoy our videos, please subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss an episode, and that's absolutely free.
If you'd like to see where we are in real time, then please join the crew over on Patreon to see the tracker map where we post a daily update.
As always, we want to say a massive thank you to everyone who supports the making of these videos, and especially our star patrons.